Alrighty then. So, I'll note that I basically have some videos basically up here. And unlike the past ones, these are called DFuxa Plays Post-7DRL 2023. And that's because despite just basically like still saying voting ends in 7 days, 15 hours, 21 minutes, and 27 seconds, now 26, 25, 24, the voting is done, and the scores are up. The 2023 7DRL Challenge evaluation process has been concluded for this year, and everything's basically done. Now, for my part, I do plan to actually do a few more games basically for you guys in the future. I'm not sure when I'm basically going to get to them, but I'll basically play some more games for you guys when I get around to it. But that's not the purpose of this video here. The purpose of this video is basically to talk about the reviewing process and what my thoughts basically on it. So let's get to that. Alright, so first things first. I'll note I did have a video basically up doing this already, but I decided that video was not very good, so I'm basically doing this again. Just so you know, basically, I referenced it basically in Croc or Boat Journey. That was basically before this one, so just throwing it out there. Alright, so now I'm actually going to break this into parts, so let me just get into part 1 here in a moment, so bear with me. Alright then, so I'm ready to go. Before I basically give my thoughts on the process here, I'm just going to break down how it was basically done and what basically everything here basically means. So you'll basically note that when you're looking at these scores, they're basically ranked on completeness, aesthetics, fun, innovation, scope, roguelikeness, and then there's an average score of all the scores in total. And I'll note that these scores are basically broken down based on who basically reviewed them. So if basically 3 people rate a game a 3, then there's a 3 up here. If 2 people basically rated as a 3 and one person rated it a 2, then it's a score of 2.67. And that applies to all the games that basically have 3 players, 3 reviewers basically for them, because obviously if you get down to some of these lower scores, there's only 2 reviewers, and then when you get down to the really low ones, there's only 1. And these basically form the averages you basically see over here. So this is basically an average that basically breaks down all the scores basically in the rankings, as well as a final review from the person doing it. Alright, so that's basically how this is basically done. But how do we basically come to input these scores and such, and all this other stuff basically. So before I actually get to that, I'll note that this is basically the viewer sheet, and it basically gives you some simple instructions on how you're basically going to go about it. So how it was basically done for this year, we were basically breaking these games down into work units. And each working unit may have at least 5 games in it. Sometimes they may have 4, sometimes they may have 3. And toward the end of it, we had only 1 because we're basically at the end, and you're just trying to just get them done out of the way. We're supposed to basically do this for 20 or 40 minutes, spent on each game. So you're supposed to spend up to 20 minutes basically on even the games you don't like, and try not to exceed 40 minutes on the games you really do like. So you're not basically wasting your time more than you basically have to. You can basically still play them right, but you're not supposed to be, supposed to waste your time for the most part. The reviews should be constructed with fairness and honesty. They shouldn't be too long. Bullet points are fine. Sometimes people give very long-winded sentences. Sometimes they don't. But for the most part, I think it's helpful all around. We then rank them into categories, and for 7-year-old reviewers, it's important to basically have some experience in past exploitations of past 7-year-olds. So there's that too. The review is done with a spreadsheet in Google Drive, and I don't actually have a spreadsheet here, but I did copy the instructions for my own personal use here. Note that this is not the actual Google sheet. This is just the instructions that are copied into its own separate thing here. You can actually see down here it only says sheet 1. I'll note that basically in the actual Google sheet there's basically multiple tabs down here with the work units, the reviews, and everything else. So this is just the instructions. But anyhow, I'll note that basically, how it basically works is on the next, sheet that will be here, each of these, work units will be, presented, And how it basically goes about, like, us basically assigning work units is that basically you put your name into a work unit, and you basically review those 5 games. And the idea is that you're supposed to basically put your name into, like, the next work unit that's applicable to you when you're basically, like, done, like, your, currently set of work units. So that's basically how it's, like, sort of randomized. And you're basically not supposed to pick and choose what games you basically, like, do. So if there's, like, a work unit, you, like, have a game you don't like, you still have to basically do it. I know that some people made exceptions because, like, maybe on, like, Linux, and Linux is basically a different operating system than, like, Windows, and sometimes people didn't have any, like, Linux, based games in their, like, work units, so they skip those, like, work units. But other than that, for the most part, it's basically, like, followed as it should be. So yeah, pick the first one that has no reviewer and then add your reviewer name to it and work until it's done. So I'll note basically, like, something I know as well is that there was basically a sort of, like, time limit before, like, basically your name was basically unassigned from work unit. Essentially, you're supposed to try and, like, get these done in a week, where you basically go through to 5 games in a week and then, like, post the reviews and, like, move on. Some people may have, like, taken longer than a week and they get their names unassigned, and then of course someone else basically, like, take over the work unit and get done. That may be because, like, it didn't have time or whatnot, but it happened a couple times. Just how it goes. And you can basically see, like, the other stuff basically down here. So if you can't review a game, it's like mark in red. Some people skip work units if they couldn't, like, do it, so that's fine as well, I guess. But yeah, basically mark ones in red you can't review, mark ones in green you can review. Hit the done when you're basically done. Move on to the next one. Now, I figured it's very important to go over these like questions and answers that are basically right here, because for those who basically watched Kizrati's stream, he noted that basically, like, you're supposed to basically review, like, the 7DRL version of the game. That was actually not applicable to this, like, year. And it's important basically to note that, like, the idea here is that you're basically supposed to review the latest post-bug fix release 7DRL version for, like, this, like, reviewing process, evaluation process. And you actually see that, like, right down right here. Should we play 7DRL or post-7DRL versions? And yeah, play the post-7DRL versions, especially bug fix releases. Don't be considered major changes in your scoring and mention that in your review. Now, to sort of, like, give an explanation as to why this basically is, Darren had noted that a lot of the games basically being presented in, like, the 7DRLs, like, this year and, like, compared to, like, last year, so are basically now browser-based. And browser-based games can't really be updated. Well, they can be updated, but if they're updated, they can't, like, have, like, their old updates basically available to, like, play. So past, versions of the game are just not available to basically play on a browser-based game. And some people, like, they may have, like, withheld, like, doing updates basically to their game and resolve this on the browser-based games, but, for the most part, the idea here is that, like, you can basically keep updating your browser-based game, and, if you're basically using an executable or some other type thing like that, we're still basically supposed to play the, like, updated, like, executables as well, because, it is, like, it goes in line with, like, the browser-based games. Other than that, there's a couple other things basically to do here, like, if you have your own game working on it, basically skip it. Consider, like, it's unplayable to you. If you already reviewed a game, skip it. Consider this point to retreat it, like, it's like when you already made. Whether I can't get a game to work, color it red, skip it. Go to technical help. Whether I already played some games on assignment me, great, you can play them. Review them right after. How do I get to the next sheet? That's, like, this basic thing here. I can access the forums. I'll note, by the way, actually, like, how to, like, a forum to discuss stuff and, like, go to get technical help and stuff like that, but for the most part, it is what it is. Do I really have to spend 20 to 40 minutes? Preferably yes, but if you, like, it's really that bad and, you've already exhausted everything, just, like, play as much as you need to. Where enter my scores, if you have a review tab, that's not here. Can I edit my reviews later? Yes, just tweak your lines and reviews tabs anytime before the whole set of reviews is finalized. We are going to do this sparingly, though. Note that we progress older rows will be hidden for easy use. Alright, so that's basically like an overview of basically how the review process basically goes. And down here we basically have a rating system that's basically, like, defined and stuff like that. So I'll note that basically, like, for this year and, like, many past years, we have basically a 1, 2, 3 rating system for, rating the games basically for the evaluation process. And each of these, like, scores basically, like, correspond to, like, a different level of completeness or bar of, like, metric basically to, like, get that scoring. You basically see like the scores basically here. So for completeness, basically it's like, how finished a piece of software is it? How polished is it? Is it like, free of bugs? Was it crashing? Did it have all the expected features that it probably would have? And then like, very buggy, crashes, obviously missing features that makes you impact the game, you give that a 1. Polished, balanced, practically bug-free, you give it a 3. Somewhere in the middle, you give it a 2. And you basically see like, what these are all about. So aesthetics is basically about like, how do the controls work? Can you basically like, understand the graphics? Can you basically find what you basically need to, etc., etc. Is it enjoyable or compelling to play? That's obviously for fun. Innovative. Has the game done something new to be new or weird? Is it basically just like taking like an old element and making it new? Is it doing nothing new? Whatever. Scope. Not to be confused with completeness. How ambitious was this project? Was it basically a lot of rich and deep content to it? Or was it just very, very, very basic? And something you can basically expect maybe in like a day or two's work? So yeah, not much more in a tech demo. What you expect from 7DRL, beyond what you expect. And yeah, Rogue-lite's basically like, please do not consult the brilliant interpretation. This should be about how you think the game feels rather than being the arbitrary checklist. So, it is worth knowing that, we do not consult the brilliant interpretation. I mean, some people basically use that, but doesn't mean we have to consult it. Alright, so, that's basically like an overall, like, how things are basically done and scored and stuff like that. I'll basically give you some thoughts, basically like my thoughts basically towards it, but I'm just going to pause this part of the recording here, so bear with me again. So, my thoughts. Alright, so, to basically give you a sort of emphasis on this is basically my first year to actually like be a part of like the actual evaluation process for a 7DRL competition. And I also basically got to see like a lot of the inner workings, obviously, as a result of being in the inner workings. So I've got some insight basically on how it basically worked. Before I basically was basically part of that 7DRL competition for reviewing, I really have a very, very low opinion of like the 1 to 3 scoring system. I still basically do have a very low opinion of it because I don't feel like 1 to 3 is basically enough basically to grade a game. You need to have like at least a 1 to 5. But I do have some respect basically for it because it's basically sort of like, is it like, at this level? Is like what I basically see like, 1 to 3 basically doing. So it doesn't meet like this criteria for like, 2. If yes, hit 2. If no, hit 1. Alright, does it basically hit like this level for free? Above the 2. Hit yes, if 2. Or hit 3 if like, if yes, if 2, if not. And, that basically does work basically for like evaluating a game. So basically like you have very specific criteria. If it meets that criteria, you basically evaluate as such. So I do actually at least have some more respect basically for it at this point. At least more than I did have it coming in. What I really don't have respect for though is like the categories basically themselves. For the most part, how can I put this? These are basically outdated. And I think like both Darren and like the rest of the crew basically managing the competition probably know that they're outdated. They're basically made in like the 2000s, right? So they're out of touch with like today's like world for the most part, and they really should be like updated. I won't basically go into specifics like on what the basic name should be or like what should be like done, but just to basically throw out an example. I'll note that basically one thing I went into like for a lot of these games that I really wish I could have graded these games basically on was like approachability. And what I basically mean by approachability is like, how easy is it to basically get into the game, learn what you have to basically do, and like, get to actually playing the game. A lot of these games basically up here, for example, in like the top like, ranks, they actually aren't that great for approachability. I have like, Loose Spirits basically up here, and if I was basically to have like an approachability score, basically rank this one, I actually would rank this one a 1. It's not very approachable. Decker is probably like, also pretty bad. I might rank it a 2. I might give it a 1. Depends on like, how generous I basically feel. Puddle Path, which I basically ranked like, myself pretty lowly, and it's like, down here, like, Puddle Path, it's basically got like, a 2.17. This game is actually very, very approachable. And it's because it actually has, wait for it. Oh, well, that happened. But whatever. So, just jumping into this game, it's got a tutorial. So this game actually has like, you know, something that many 7-year-olds basically don't. And, you know, it would have been nice to actually be able to grade like this game appropriately on like the fact that it has a tutorial. And I'll note by the way as well, there's also been like, you know, past 7-year-olds that are like, you know, worth mentioning that are also very approachable, that like have like, you know, mechanics they may not like, you know, fully understand. I have Golden Crone Hotel over here, for example, because this is a very good example of like, you know, how you're going to make a game approachable. So besides like having to help here, which is like important, and tips, blah blah. So I started a new game here. So let's go over the Vagabond. Right at the start of like a new game here for like, you know, Golden Crone Hotel. You basically have like this like, you know, sunlight basically pouring into the, you know, the hotel. And for those who don't remember, there's basically this noble vampire up here. And if you try and fight him, it's not going to go very well. So let's go for R for a quick restart. And basically the idea here is for like fighting this guy here, you have to basically lure him into the sunlight basically to kill him. And that's a very like, you know, forced way of basically like, you know, teaching someone basically how to play the game. But it's actually a very like, you know, clever and important way of basically doing it. To basically throw out like, you know, another example I can basically think of like of an actual roguelike that basically did it, that'd be like Castle of the Winds. Castle of the Winds, for like those who don't know what that game was basically all about, the very first level in like that game, the mines basically, it actually has like a diagonal path. So if you're basically playing like the arrow keys on like your computer, eventually you'll hit that diagonal path and be like, I can't use the arrow keys to get up here. How do I get up here? And it actually forces you to actually use like, you know, the numpad, like, you know, keys basically to use the diagonals to basically get up the like, you know, the 8 paths basically. All right, so that's basically like, you know, puzzle path and like, you know, those games. I'll note that for like, you know, Loose Spirits and Decker, by the way, they do actually have like help, like, you know, Decker basically has like the help basically in like the game itself, and Loose Spirits like, you know, also has like these like tips basically outside as well. So I basically learn about the spirits here or whatnot, scrolls. But okay, well, I'm gonna just do this properly. Click F1. So I'll note that basically like looking at Decker here, it basically has like a wall of text basically for me to read, which is not very approachable, but it does at least help. But the UI basically is like also like, you know, full of stuff that like, you know, at a glance I have no idea what it basically does. Like what does basically the memory does? Is that my inventory? What's like the personnel stuff is up here. So a lot of stuff like, you know, Decker, you have to basically like read and like learn a lot of basically how it basically works, which basically is like, you know, very off-putting sometimes to like, you know, basically like, you know, learning basically how the game basically like plays and like getting into it. Loose Spirits. Now in Loose Spirits case, I'll note that basically if you look at like, you know, Kids Ready's stream as well as like my own, the first things we basically did like, you know, collectively when I basically played this game, we basically went to a new game here. We played like the Witch, basically after reading like the, you know, the wiki and stuff like that, and we basically moved around into like the house like so. And for those who basically have played like Loose Spirits, the idea here for this game is you actually have to wait before you can actually do anything, because if you don't wait, and how do I basically wait again in this game? I've forgotten the controls. Alright, so arrow keys, Z are period to rest. So if you don't actually rest in like, you know, Loose Spirits here, you don't actually get access to your echoes. And I actually spent like the first like, you know, run basically for like, you know, Loose Spirits as well as like Kyozurari basically did. We basically walked around, not like, you know, waiting and getting our echoes. And that wasn't like, you know, basically like, you know, told to us. Well, it was told to us, but it wasn't really forced that we had to basically do that in like some way, or like, you know, sort of like indicate in the game itself. And those are like really good like, you know, examples of like, you know, games that don't really have very good approachability. And it's something I really think should be like, you know, looked at basically like a grading system for like, you know, these games. Outside of that, the current like, you know, ones right here, you could probably like, you know, break down like aesthetics basically into like, you know, controls and like graphics and stuff like that. Really, aesthetics basically works, but you know, you could put like, you know, I think Darren was basically mentioning you might like, you know, change it over to like, you know, UI because user interface, but you can really break it down into like, you know, 2 different categories, I think. Some of the other stuff like, you know, scope could probably be like renamed to like, you know, depth, because that's basically what it's basically all about. Is there basically a lot of depth to this game, or like, you know, is it basically like this like, you know, very shallow? That's basically how I basically looked at like scope, by the way. Is there like, you know, a lot of depth like, you know, to like, you know, what you can basically do with the character, or like what the monster can basically do to you, or is it basically just like, you know, he runs up to you, he hits you, you hit him. That's basically the, you know, the depth of the game. But for the most part, they still work basically these like old carries. Not like they're bad or anything like that. It's just they could be updated. All right, so that's basically like my initial thoughts basically here in the process here a little bit. I'll basically give some personal thoughts basically about my own contributions to this process, but we'll do that in the final part. So bear with me one more time. All right then. So my contributions to this evaluation process. So for those who are basically in the know, or not really basically in the know, but just viewing this page here. You'll note that basically I was basically part of a challenge review team, and I basically had 22.12%, I guess, in the amount of reviews that are basically done. And this basically translates into a lot of reviews that I also did videos for. In total, I did about 94 video reviews, for each of the individual games I basically touched on. And a little bit toward the end of the evaluation process, I also posted a link to each of these videos that I basically could in the respective HDIO pages. I made an announcement for it basically in the Discord, etc., etc. And I believe for the most part, a lot of the developers were actually very appreciative of the fact that someone actually did a video of their game as opposed to leaving a written review, because they can actually see someone actually playing their game, and some of them really benefited quite a bit from it. To actually note some person a couple of people actually made comments who actually I know they actually benefited from it, Jared, for example, the very top game here, Congo Dungeon. He noted that from looking at my video play, he's able to actually see that there's actually artifacts being left on the game I was basically playing. So items that basically were not actually in the game are actually appearing that shouldn't be there. And he also basically of course got more correspondence basically about the desync issues that this game is basically having. So Congo Dungeon, basically, for those who don't know what the game basically is, it's basically based off of not Vampire Survivors. It's based off of Crypt of the Necrodancer, and Crypt of the Necrodancer is basically a rhythmatic roguelike basically, where you have to hit your keys basically toward the beat. And this game is basically very similar to that, but it didn't have a desync measure or anything like that for your key presses. And as a result, sometimes basically you'd be entering your key when the beat was basically going, and the game would register it because there was a desync issue. And he eventually noticed it himself, but this will also contribute to him basically find that issue basically out. So hopefully it's helpful to him. I'll note that another person who basically made a comment about watching my video and learning something very important was the developer for Knave's Tale. So Knave's Tale was basically a game that only had let's see here, 2 people basically review it. And it's worth noting that this game, when I basically played it, I noted how it felt very handcrafted. And the developer basically left a comment looking after this and being well, I couldn't map it. When I disabled the save load, I used a quick fix that would just reset the game after death to bypass the little menu. That reset apparently includes the seed of the random generator, meaning you always see the last level. So yeah, he made a very a fatal mistake basically to his game. And not only did it basically get he only a 1 basically from me for the rogueness, because yeah, I gave him a 1 for obvious reasons. So 1. There's no procedural generation on my viewing. I don't give you more than a 1 basically for it. So sorry. But more importantly than that, basically he's able to actually tell that basically, oh, I did this thing wrong in my game. And I don't know if he has updated his game since then, but I don't see anything changed here, so I'm assuming he basically hasn't. But maybe in the future he might. But anyways, one of the things about my videos is that it's very helpful for developers basically to see errors basically as someone else is basically playing their game they may not see themselves. So hopefully it's basically helpful to them. But one thing I basically note about my videos is that I'm actually wondering if I actually should do it again next year. Something to know about making videos, it actually takes a lot of time basically to compress the video, edit the video, and then basically throw it up in YouTube. And that's the time I actually could be using to review more games. And a lot of these games I basically played, I didn't really feel they really really deserve to be like given like a video playthrough. Some games, for example, like say like Backfire, for example, which is basically like somewhere in here. So Backfire. I'm not basically only running review for this game because I was the only one who basically reviewed it, and right after I basically saw it, I was like, nope, this is not a roguelike at all. This really shouldn't be in a 7DRL. It hasn't been enough done on it. So that's basically one of the games that I actually mentioned to Darren like this should probably be removed. And that's actually something to note about the process, by the way. It is possible for your game to be removed from like the reviewing process if we we as reviewers actually don't feel it's basically meaning enough criteria for the competition. If your game basically didn't have enough a really basically score in our mind, or a scope score in our mind, or completely score in our mind, that's basically grounds for us basically mentioning to Darren to probably be removed from being reviewed. And I basically did, some other viewers basically did, Darren himself basically did a lot. And that's basically how we were able to get through the process so fast this year, actually, by the way, is because as a simple fact, we were basically going through these games and viciously removing the lower rank ones based from being reviewed more they need to. But yeah, just games like that they didn't really need video review. And for most part, probably what I'll basically do next year, unless it's by request or unless it's a game I really really want to basically show off, I'm probably not going to basically do as many video reviews as I basically did. So just keep that in mind, perhaps for the next year. Other than that, what else can I basically say about my reviews and stuff like that? So one thing I'm actually wondering about is because of the simple fact that my reviews are pretty helpful for helping developers basically out. If I should actually do the videos basically before the process is done or after. Something to note about my reviews is that because they're really helpful actually to developers actually find issues, that's actually stuff they can actually work on to actually fix their games. Now I actually didn't really post my reviews for these guys basically right as soon as they're basically done, but and basically toward the end when they basically didn't really have time to basically fix anything, except for Jer, who basically is Jer. And for the most part, I'm more in 2024 where I basically do this again perhaps. If I should basically be a little more shall we say not as active as game is usually 7-year-olds basically done right away, as opposed to waiting maybe until the end of April for the most part when this process is done again to do them. That might be what I might want to do, or we'll see basically. I might still do videos by request basically before time, but it's basically thoughts basically for the future. And then I guess I should probably comment about the scoring by the way as well. So I'll note that basically being a part of the review team, I also was important making scores and stuff for this stuff here. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the scores basically gave for a lot of these games here. I felt that for the most part, I wasn't too harsh on any specific game, and where I basically could, I was basically being fairly generous to a lot of games. Now I will note that there is one exception to this, where there's actually a game that I actually felt I was too generous basically on, and that's obviously that's honestly actually the first game here, Conga Dungeon. So Jeremy, if you're basically watching this, I'll note that I probably rated your game a little too high, and if I was basically to drop down your game basically in a score somewhere, it would probably be incompleteness, since, well, you already know what the completeness score is basically rated on. You should probably already guess what it's basically being dropped down for. But it's basically based on a desync issue and the artifacts basically of showing up that really shouldn't be on the screen. But for the most part, that's basically all I really have to say about the evaluation process. In the future, I'll basically try to come back to doing more 7-year-olds for you guys. Basically it's I went over, but basically get to Boris Keep and stuff like that. I basically plan to at least do all the videos basically up to what was it? I think I'm basically gonna go down as far as any game that's basically rated 2.0 or above will be games I'm basically gonna do a video review of. I'm not really sure I'm gonna do any more in that, but that's basically the plan right now. Alright, so that's basically it for us, quick video basically going over my thoughts and review process and how it worked and stuff like that. Maybe it'll be enjoyable to you guys, maybe it won't, who really knows, but I figured it's important basically to throw it out there. Other than that, this is it for 7-year-old 2023 for the most part. I'll have a few more videos basically up, but that's basically it for now, so take care.